Armin sat in his office, staring at the glass window that looked over the city. From the top floor of the tall building, he could see the lights glowing like stars on the ground. The world outside seemed alive, full of movement, laughter, and warmth. But inside his office, there was only silence. His desk was neat, his files perfectly arranged, his schedule always full, yet his heart felt strangely empty. He was known as one of the most successful CEOs in the city. People admired his sharp mind, his discipline, and the empire he had built with his own hands. Every article about him spoke of his achievements, his wealth, and his ability to turn every challenge into an opportunity. To outsiders, he had everything a person could dream of. But behind the closed doors of his home and office, there was no one waiting for him, no one to ask how his day had been, no one to share a meal with. Every night, when he returned home, the sound of his shoes echoed in the wide hallway of his mansion. The walls were decorated with paintings, the furniture polished, and every corner looked perfect. Yet the house felt lifeless. He often left the television on just to fill the silence. Sometimes he would walk into the kitchen and prepare a cup of tea for himself, but even the taste of it reminded him of loneliness. Armin's story had not always been this way. When he was young, he had dreams like every child. But life had taken his parents from him too soon. He had grown up learning to be strong on his own, learning to hide his pain behind a mask of discipline. He buried himself in studies, then in work, and finally in building a company that became his world. But the success that gave him everything in the eyes of others also took away the simple joys of life. Somewhere along the way, he forgot what it meant to laugh freely, to share stories at a dinner table, to feel the comfort of belonging. At work, his employees respected him but kept their distance. He rarely smiled, and his instructions were always short and direct. They whispered about him in the break room, saying he was cold, heartless, and unapproachable. Some admired his focus, but others pitied him secretly, thinking how strange it was that a man with so much power and wealth walked alone. On the outside, he was always polished expensive suits, shiny shoes, and a calm expression that never broke. But when he returned to his empty home, he sometimes sat in the dark, wondering what all of it really meant. He had built a world where he was surrounded by people during the day but completely alone at night. There were times when memories of his childhood would return to him. He would remember sitting at the table with his parents, laughing at small things, and the warmth of his mother's voice calling him for dinner. He could remember his father's stories, the ones that gave him courage as a little boy. Those memories came like gentle waves, and then they left, leaving behind a deeper ache. He longed for that warmth, but he did not know how to find it anymore. One Friday evening, after a long week filled with meetings and deadlines, he found himself sitting in his car outside his house, unwilling to step inside. The silence waiting behind the doors felt heavier than usual. He looked at the empty seats beside him and thought about how different life could be if someone were there. But then he shook his head, pushing the thought away. He told himself he didn't need anyone. Success was enough. Yet deep inside, he knew it wasn't true. Success filled his pockets but not his heart. Sometimes, during office parties or social gatherings, he would watch families together. He noticed how a child's laughter could brighten a room, how parents held their kids with love, and how couples shared simple smiles that spoke more than words. He never showed it, but inside he wished he had something like that. He wanted someone to look at him not as a CEO, not as a powerful man, but just as a human being who needed love. Despite his achievements, he carried an invisible weight. He told himself he was strong, but strength without love felt like a prison. He lived in that prison every single day, and no one around him seemed to notice. The city outside his window kept moving, people rushing home to their families, friends meeting at cafes, children holding balloons on the streets. And there he was, a man who had conquered the business world but lost the simplest treasure of all, companionship. One evening, As he walked back from a meeting, the streets were busier than usual. Families were out, children were playing, and small shops were decorated with lights. He walked past them without slowing down, but something in his heart stirred. He wondered what it would feel like to sit in one of those little cafes with someone, to laugh over a simple meal, to share a story, or even to argue about something small. It was a thought he quickly pushed aside, but it stayed with him longer than he expected. Armin often convinced himself that he didn't have time for such things, that he was different from others. But loneliness has a way of whispering in the quiet hours of the night, reminding a person of what they lack. It reminded him every night when he sat alone at his dining table with food untouched, every morning when he drank coffee with no one to share it with, every birthday when his phone was silent. He lived in a circle where work filled the hours, success filled the newspapers, but his heart remained empty. And though he never admitted it to anyone, not even himself, he longed for someone to notice the silence behind his eyes. Armin didn't know that his life was about to change soon. He didn't know that an unexpected meeting was waiting for him, one that would shake the walls he had built around his heart for years. He didn't know that someone small, with innocent words, would remind him of what it meant to be human again. But for now, he remained the lonely CEO, powerful in the world's eyes, yet quietly broken inside, waiting unknowingly for a light to enter his darkness. The next morning, Armin left his mansion earlier than usual. The driver waited for him near the gate, but he shook his head and decided to walk for a while before reaching the car. The streets were still waking up, shopkeepers lifting shutters, children holding their parents' hands on the way to school, and the air fresh from the night's rain. For some reason, he felt like walking, as if the silence inside him needed to meet the noise of the world outside. He walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, his thoughts heavy with the same old questions. Why did he always feel something was missing? Why did everything feel empty, even after all his achievements? His eyes moved from one corner of the street to another, but he wasn't really seeing anything until a small, cheerful voice cut through his thoughts. "Would you like a balloon, sir?" Armin stopped and turned. A little girl stood near the entrance of a bookstore. She had a basket of colorful balloons tied together, red, yellow, and blue, shining under the morning sun. She was no older than 8 or 9, with bright eyes and a smile that seemed too big for her small face. He looked at her, unsure why she was talking to him. He wasn't used to strangers, especially children, approaching him. People usually avoided him or spoke with him only when they had something important to say. But here was this girl, looking at him as if he was just another passerby. "No, thank you," he said softly, his voice calm but distant. The girl tilted her head, studying him in a way that made him strangely uncomfortable. Then, without losing her smile, she said, "You look sad. Balloons can make people happy. Are you sure you don't want one?" Her words surprised him. Nobody ever told him he looked sad. People told him he looked strong, confident, even intimidating. But this little girl, who didn't know his name, saw something most people ignored. "I don't need a balloon," he replied, almost whispering. "Everyone needs a balloon sometimes," she said firmly, her tiny hands holding the strings tighter. He stared at her, unable to reply. Something about her innocence touched a part of him he had kept locked for years. He almost smiled, but the expression faded before it reached his lips. "Why are you giving them away?" he finally asked. "They're for my birthday," she said proudly. "I'm giving them to people so they can smile with me today. My dad said he's busy and can't come home early. My mom also has work. But I still want today to be special. So, I decided to share balloons with others." Her voice was cheerful, but Armin caught a faint loneliness in her words. He knew that feeling too well. "Your parents didn't come for your birthday?" he asked carefully. "They'll come later, maybe," she replied, her smile shrinking for the first time. But then she quickly brightened again and said, "But it's okay. I still have my balloons. And maybe some new friends." Armin felt a strange ache in his chest. He looked at her more closely now. She was wearing a simple dress, not new, but clean and neatly pressed. Her shoes were a little worn out, yet she carried herself with so much energy that it didn't seem to matter. She was a child who had learned to make happiness out of small things. "You don't have a family too?" she suddenly asked. The question hit him harder than he expected. His lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever asked him that directly. People respected his privacy, his silence. But this girl, with her big eyes, had seen through him. He finally cleared his throat. "I live alone." The girl looked at him for a moment, as if studying his soul. Then she smiled again. "Then you should come to my birthday. You won't be alone, and I won't be alone either. We can both have cake." Armin was speechless. He, the powerful CEO who people feared to approach, was being invited to a little girl's birthday party. No one had invited him to anything personal in years. His calendar was filled with business meetings, conferences, and dinners with clients, but never with something as simple and warm as a child's birthday. Before he could reply, the girl pulled out a small card from her pocket. It was handmade, the paper slightly bent at the edges, decorated with colorful crayon drawings of balloons, stars, and a big cake. In the center, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "You are invited to Mira's birthday." She handed it to him with both hands, as if it were the most precious gift in the world. Armin took the card slowly. His fingers brushed the rough paper, and for a moment, he just stared at it. It was simple, imperfect, yet it carried more meaning than all the glossy invitations he had ever received for grand parties. "Why me?" he finally asked. "Because you look like you need a friend," Mira replied without hesitation. He felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He wanted to refuse, to tell her he was too busy, that he had no time for such things. But the words didn't come. Instead, he quietly folded the card and slipped it into his coat pocket. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice softer than usual. Mira grinned as if she had already won. "Good. Don't forget, it's at the community hall on Rose Street. 4 o'clock. I'll be waiting." With that, she handed a balloon to another passerby and waved at him before running off to give away more balloons. Armin stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. He touched the card in his pocket again, feeling its rough edges. For reasons he couldn't explain, his heart felt lighter. As he walked back to his car, he thought about her words, "You don't have a family too." No one had ever asked him something so innocent, so honest. And her invitation, simple yet genuine, kept replaying in his mind. When he reached his office, his assistant greeted him with a list of meetings and reports. He nodded as usual, but his mind wasn't on the files in front of him. It kept drifting back to the little girl with balloons, her bright smile, and the handmade invitation card. That evening, as he returned home, he sat on his couch in silence. He pulled out the card from his pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. The colorful crayon drawings looked almost childish, but they made his luxurious house feel less empty. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange encounter. Part of him wondered if he should go. Another part of him reminded him that it wasn't his world, that he didn't belong there. But somewhere deep inside, he knew that if he didn't go, he would regret it. For the first time in years, his heart wrestled with a decision that had nothing to do with money, power, or business. It was about something far simpler: whether he could take one step toward being human again. And as he closed his eyes, the memory of Mira's bright eyes and innocent words echoed in his mind. The morning of Mira's birthday arrived like any other day for Armin. He woke up early, followed his routine, and dressed in his usual sharp suit. His assistant had already sent reminders for meetings and important calls, but his mind was elsewhere. On the table near his bed lay the little handmade card. Its edges were slightly bent now, but its colors were still bright. He had placed it there the night before, staring at it for a long time before finally deciding he would keep it close. He picked it up again, running his fingers over the uneven handwriting. For years, invitations that came his way were embossed on fine paper, sealed with golden stamps, or written with perfect calligraphy. Yet none of them had ever made him hesitate the way this simple card had. He slipped it into his coat pocket again, unsure if he would actually go, but unwilling to leave it behind. The day went on as usual: meetings, phone calls, and reports. People spoke to him with respect, some with fear, but no one with warmth. He nodded, gave instructions, and listened, yet a part of him was somewhere else entirely. At lunch, when his assistant asked if he'd be attending the evening business dinner, he surprised her by saying he wasn't sure. For the first time in years, he was considering breaking from his routine. By the time the clock struck 3, he was pacing in his office. His mind kept arguing with itself. One voice said he had no place in a child's birthday party, that it wasn't his world. The other voice reminded him of Mira's hopeful eyes, her cheerful smile, and her words, "You don't have a family too." He sat down, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. The silence in the office suddenly felt heavier than usual. That was enough. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out. The driver looked at him in surprise when he gave the address of the community hall on Rose Street. It wasn't the kind of place his car usually stopped. Still, Armin remained silent during the drive, his eyes fixed on the passing streets. The tall glass towers slowly gave way to smaller shops, colorful houses, and busy sidewalks filled with children playing and people chatting. The world seemed more alive here, less polished but more real. When the car finally stopped in front of the community hall, Armin felt a strange nervousness he hadn't known in years. The building was simple, decorated with paper flowers, balloons tied to the entrance, and a banner that read "Happy Birthday Mira" written in big, uneven letters. Parents stood chatting outside while children ran around with balloons in their hands, their laughter filling the air. For a moment, he almost told the driver to turn back. He felt out of place, like a stranger stepping into a world he had forgotten. But then he remembered the little card in his pocket. He took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the hall was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of fresh cake. Tables were decorated with simple cloths, plates of snacks, and colorful cups of juice. Children were running about, playing games, their faces painted with joy. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was full of life. Then, in the middle of the crowd, he saw her. Mira was wearing a simple pink dress with a ribbon tied at the waist. Her hair was neatly combed, and her eyes shone brighter than all the decorations around her. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. "You came," she shouted, running toward him. Armin froze, almost embarrassed by the attention. But her smile broke through his hesitation. She grabbed his hand and pulled him inside, proudly announcing, "This is my special guest." The parents looked at him with surprise. Some whispered to each other, recognizing the famous CEO, while others simply wondered who this sharply dressed man was. But Mira didn't care about their reactions. To her, he wasn't the CEO, he was just someone who had come because she invited him. Armin allowed himself to be guided by her small hands. She introduced him to her friends, showed him the cake with colorful frosting, and even offered him a cup of juice. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't describe, like being welcomed without judgment, without expectations. As the game started, Mira pulled him to join. At first, he refused, shaking his head with an awkward smile. But the children insisted, and soon he found himself holding a balloon in a simple relay game. The kids laughed loudly when he almost dropped it, and for the first time in a long while, Armin laughed too. It wasn't the polite laugh he gave at business dinners. It was real, free, and unguarded. Later, as the birthday song filled the hall, Armin stood in the back, watching. Mira closed her eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles. Everyone clapped, the children cheered, and pieces of cake were passed around. When she handed him the first slice, his throat tightened. He couldn't remember the last time someone had done something so thoughtful for him. "You're smiling," she said, handing him the cake. He looked at her, realizing she was right. He hadn't even noticed. A genuine smile had found its way to his face. The parents around began to warm up to him too, asking polite questions. They were curious about why he was there, but he kept his answers simple. As he spoke with them, he noticed something strange. These were ordinary people, living simple lives, yet there was a joy in their voices he rarely heard in boardrooms. They spoke about their children, their daily struggles, their little victories. And as he listened, he felt a sense of belonging he had never expected. The evening passed in laughter, cake, and games. When the music slowed and the children began to tire, Armin found himself sitting quietly at a corner table, just observing. Mira came and sat beside him, her plate filled with sweets. "Did you have fun?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yes. More than I thought I would." "Good," she said proudly. "Now you're not lonely today, right?" Her words were simple, but they touched him deeply. For one evening, he hadn't been the lonely CEO. He had been someone's guest, someone's friend, and part of a celebration that was small yet filled with more warmth than all the luxurious parties he had ever attended. When it was finally time to leave, Mira walked with him to the door. She handed him another balloon, a small yellow one, and said, "Take this, so you don't forget today." He took it, holding it carefully. "Thank you, Mira." She smiled and waved as he stepped outside. The driver opened the car door, but Armin paused for a moment, looking back at the hall glowing with lights, laughter still echoing. As the car drove away, he leaned back in his seat, holding the balloon gently. His mansion would still be empty when he returned, the silence would still be there, but something had changed. A little girl with a bright smile and innocent heart had reminded him what it felt like to belong, even if just for a moment. And as he glanced at the balloon in his hand, he realized he didn't want that feeling to fade. The following days felt strangely different for Armin. His life was still filled with meetings, reports, and phone calls, but something inside him had changed. Every time his mind wandered, he thought about the community hall, the laughter of children, and the simple happiness on Mira's face when she saw him walk in. He still returned to his silent mansion each evening, but now the silence didn't feel quite the same. On his table, next to the lamp, lay the yellow balloon she had given him. It was beginning to lose its air, slowly shrinking, yet he kept it as carefully as if it were a priceless treasure. For years, his house had been nothing more than walls and furniture, but that balloon made it feel a little less empty. He would often catch himself smiling when his eyes fell on it. It reminded him of something he had almost forgotten: how joy could come from small things. A few days later, as he was leaving the office, he noticed himself slowing down near the same bookstore where he had first met Mira. To his surprise, she was there again, this time sitting on the steps with a book in her lap. When she spotted him, her face lit up. "You came," she exclaimed, closing her book quickly. Armin nodded, almost shyly. "I was passing by." She giggled. "You don't have to explain. I know you came to see me." Her words caught him off guard, but he didn't deny them. There was something about her honesty that didn't allow him to hide behind his usual walls. He sat beside her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at ease sitting quietly without the weight of formality. "What are you reading?" he asked. It's a story about a girl who finds a magic garden, Mira replied, showing him the worn-out cover. Whenever she feels sad, she goes there, and the flowers talk to her. Do flowers really talk? He asked gently. They do, if you listen with your heart, she said seriously, her eyes sparkling with innocence. Armin felt something stir inside him again. He realized that her simple way of seeing the world was exactly what he had lost over the years. He had learned to listen with his mind, with logic and reason, but not with his heart. As the days turned into weeks, their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes he found her near the bookstore, sometimes at the park feeding birds, and occasionally she would visit his office building, waiting at the reception with a bright smile until he came down. His employees were shocked the first time they saw the cold CEO walking hand in hand with a little girl, listening to her chatter as if it were the most important thing in the world. At first, Armin worried about what people would say, but soon he stopped caring. Mira's company brought him something money had never bought: peace. She asked him questions no one else dared to ask. Why do you always look serious? Do you ever eat ice cream? Don't you get tired of wearing black suits every day? Her innocent curiosity forced him to laugh, sometimes even at himself. For years, he had lived behind an image of power and perfection, but with Mira, he didn't need any of that. He could just be human. One evening, Mira invited him again, this time not to a birthday, but to her small home. She wanted him to meet her mother. Her father was away for work, but her mother welcomed him warmly. Their house was small compared to his mansion, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of freshly cooked food. He sat at their modest table, eating a simple meal, and realized it tasted better than any gourmet dish he had ever tried at luxurious hotels. Her mother thanked him for being kind to Mira. She explained that her husband's work often kept him away, and she herself struggled to balance her job and home. Sometimes Mira felt lonely, though she rarely showed it. Armin listened silently, his chest tightening. He understood that loneliness all too well. That night, when he returned home, the silence felt heavier again, but not in the same empty way as before. Now he could compare it. He had tasted what warmth felt like, and suddenly his mansion felt colder than ever. The next weekend, he surprised Mira by taking her to a park with a big playground. At first, she couldn't believe it. You have time for this? She asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. I do today, he said simply. She ran ahead, climbing the swings, sliding down slides, and laughing so loudly that even Armin couldn't help but laugh along. He pushed her swing higher and higher, and for the first time in years, he felt like a child himself. The people around looked curiously at the sight of a powerful CEO in a playground, but he didn't care. As the sun began to set, they sat on a bench eating ice cream. Mira licked her cone happily, while Armin tasted his slowly, as if rediscovering something he had forgotten. See, she said with pride. Life is better with ice cream. He nodded, smiling. You're right. Those words stayed with him. Life was better with simple things: laughter, friendship, and even ice cream. But it wasn't just Mira who was changing. Armin himself was slowly transforming. His employees noticed that he smiled more often, spoke a little softer, and even took breaks, something he had never done before. The man who once carried only cold silence in his eyes now carried a quiet warmth. One afternoon, during a board meeting, his colleagues were stunned when he cancelled a late-night discussion, saying he had somewhere else to be. That somewhere was simply sitting on a park bench with Mira, listening to her stories about school and her little adventures. Armin began to realize that wealth and power had given him comfort but not happiness. Happiness was in moments like these: watching a child laugh, sharing simple food, and listening without judgment. Yet deep inside, he also felt fear. Fear of losing this newfound light, fear that it might disappear just as quickly as it had entered his life. He had lived too long in loneliness to easily believe in joy. One evening, as they walked together, Mira suddenly stopped and looked up at him seriously. "Promise me something," she said. "What is it?" he asked. "Promise me you won't be lonely anymore." Her words pierced through him. He didn't know how to promise something like that, but seeing the hope in her eyes, he simply nodded. "I'll try." She smiled, satisfied, and slipped her small hand into his. And in that moment, he realized that he already wasn't as lonely as before. That night, when he returned home, the silence was still there, but it didn't bother him the same way. Because now, in his heart, there was a voice that reminded him he wasn't alone anymore. A little girl had found her way into his life, and she had given him something he never knew he needed: hope. The days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly became months. Life for Armin was no longer the same. The man who once lived only for deadlines, business trips, and meetings now carried a little bit of joy in his heart each day. His office staff whispered about the change. They said the boss smiled more often, he greeted them with a nod, and sometimes even asked about their families. These were small gestures, but for people who had always known him as cold and distant, they were enough to notice. But the biggest change wasn't visible in his office. It was in his heart. Every evening, after his long hours of work, he looked forward to meeting Mira. Sometimes they sat at the park, sometimes they walked near the bookstore, and sometimes they just shared ice cream cones on a quiet street corner. Each moment, however ordinary, felt extraordinary to Armin because they filled a space inside him that had been empty for years. His mansion, once silent and lifeless, slowly began to change too. One weekend, he invited Mira and her mother over for dinner. They hesitated at first, feeling that their simple lives didn't belong in such a grand place. But Mira, with her fearless heart, pulled her mother along. The moment they stepped inside, the mansion seemed brighter. Mira ran through the hallways with laughter echoing against the walls, her small footsteps bringing life to the empty space. Her mother cooked in the kitchen with him, preparing a meal together. Armin, who had always been served by chefs and staff, found himself chopping vegetables under her guidance. He wasn't skilled, but the laughter they shared while cooking made the food taste better than any fine restaurant. That night, when they sat around the dining table, eating together, Armin felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt like part of a family. After they left, the silence in the house returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Now it held a promise, a memory, and a hope that it wouldn't always be this way. One afternoon, while sitting in the park with Mira, she looked at him with her usual honesty and asked, "Do you still feel lonely?" Armin thought carefully before answering. "Not like before." "Good," she said firmly. "Because you have us now. My mom likes you too, even though she doesn't say much. And I think you're my favorite grown-up." Her words touched him more than she could ever understand. For years, he had been praised for his achievements, his intelligence, and his wealth. But those words never reached his heart the way this child's simple declaration did. Slowly, Armin began to open himself to the world outside his office. He reduced the endless hours of overtime, started taking short breaks, and even encouraged his employees to spend more time with their families. Some of them looked at him in shock, wondering what had changed their strict boss, but others silently smiled, grateful for the softer side of him. One day, his assistant found him staring at a photo frame on his desk. It wasn't one of his awards or a business event picture. It was a photo of him and Mira at the park, both laughing as she held a balloon. The assistant had never seen such a picture in his office before. That single image explained more than words could. The bond between Armin and Mira grew deeper. He helped her with her homework, encouraged her dreams, and even attended her school play. Sitting among parents in the crowded hall, cheering for a child who wasn't his by blood but felt like his own, brought tears to his eyes. He had never imagined himself in such a place, yet there he was, clapping louder than anyone else. Her mother, too, began to notice the change. At first, she had been cautious. She knew Heartwarming was a powerful man, surrounded by wealth and influence. She feared he might one day walk away, leaving her daughter heartbroken. But as weeks turned into months, she saw his sincerity. He wasn't with Mira because of pity. He was with her because he truly cared. One evening, when she thanked him for being there for her daughter, he replied quietly, "She gave me more than I gave her. She reminded me that I still have a heart." It was true. Mira had become the bridge that connected him back to the world of emotions, laughter, and love. As the year drew to a close, Armin stood by his window once again, looking over the glowing city. But this time, he didn't feel the same emptiness he once felt. He remembered the lonely nights, the silence of his mansion, and the weight of success without joy. And then he remembered the little girl with balloons, who had asked him one simple question that changed his life: "You don't have a family too?" That question had opened a door he didn't even know was there. Through it walked a child with innocence and kindness, who showed him that family isn't always about blood, it's about love, care, and presence. On New Year's Eve, instead of attending a lavish party, Armin found himself sitting in Mira's living room with her and her mother. They ate simple food, laughed at silly games, and watched fireworks from the balcony. When midnight arrived, Mira hugged him tightly and whispered, "Happy New Year, my family." Those words broke the last bit of loneliness inside him. His eyes grew wet, but his smile was brighter than the fireworks outside. He hugged her back and realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. Armin was no longer just a lonely CEO. He was a man who had rediscovered the beauty of connection, the comfort of laughter, and the warmth of belonging. He had learned that true wealth wasn't in tall buildings or bank accounts but in moments shared with people who cared. And so, his story, which had begun with silence and loneliness, found its turning point in the smile of a child. From that moment on, he promised himself that he would never let loneliness define him again. He had a new beginning, and this time, he wasn't walking alone.